Are you critical of the Hollywood that makes violent movies?
I think that I'm angry with some of the Jews. I'm very goddamn angry at some of the Jews who have known that, who have suffered terribly at the hands of the Russians, of the Germans, of the Poles, and all the anti-Semitic elements in Europe. Hollywood is run by Jews. It's owned by Jews. And they should have a greater sensitivity about the issue of people who are suffering.
Jews are also rapidly gaining control in Congress. In 1976, there were virtually no Jewish political action committees. In 1986, there were more than 70 Jewish PACs. In 1972, there were 2 Jewish senators and 12 Jewish representatives in Congress. In 1986, there were 8 Jewish senators and 30 Jewish representatives. In 1986, more than 50% of the budget of the Democratic Party was paid for by Jews, with Jews paying 25% of the Republican budget.
As our study in the synagogue library reveals, there does exist a tendency toward Jewish domination of our society. Where is all this headed?
Question: how do you make the United States Congress do what you want it to do? Answer: buy it.
How can that be done?
By making sure that a majority of senators and congresspersons are in your pocket, so to speak.
You mean bribe them?
If supporting candidates with massive campaign contributions so that they will do your bidding if they are elected is bribery, then yes, you've hit the nail on the head.
But isn't bribery illegal?
It should be, but very little seems to be done about it. The staggering amounts of money spent on U.S. elections means that it is virtually impossible to tell where campaign contributions originate, and to make things easier, the United States Supreme Court in January 2010 reversed 20 years of restrictions on corporate campaign contributions.
If I wanted to buy Congress, which candidates should I choose? Democrats or Republicans?
Both. Then you can't lose. The winner does what he's told, and the loser isn't going to report you for breaking campaign contribution rules because they've already accepted your tainted money in return for promises to further your political agenda. The system is as safe as houses, the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate.
But who would have enough money to do all this?
That's an easy one. AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And if you're wondering where they get the money from, a lot of it comes from the American taxpayer. Every year, loyal U.S. citizens dutifully pay their federal taxes, which are then used for many purposes, one of which is to supply aid in various forms to Israel, currently estimated at being about $3 billion per year. Some of this aid is used to buy U.S.-made weapons, which allow Israel to continuously threaten its neighbors and enables them to finance the hugely expensive apartheid wall, effectively fencing off the Palestinians and making them prisoners in their own land. It is self-evident that some of this money is bound to find its way back to the United States to be used to top up the election campaign funds for politicians, who, when elected, will be very keen to vote even more aid to Israel next time around. So, not only are American taxes being used to support the apartheid state of Israel, some of that money is being used to help elect candidates who are more interested in getting re-elected than they are in America's best interests, which means that Americans are actually paying for the demise of their own democracy. Yet democracy is something which successive U.S. presidents have been crying out is a basic right for everyone on the planet. What hypocrisy! It doesn't much matter which candidate wins, Democrat or Republican, or at what level, congressperson, senator, vice president, or president. He or she, having taken the proverbial 30 pieces of silver, is now expected to do AIPAC's bidding. The penalty for not doing so being the withholding of campaign funds when the next election circus comes to town. But before that happens, the AIPAC circus is coming to town. Washington, that is, May 22nd to May 24th, 2011. But before we take a look at their agenda, I want to explain my pronunciation of the name. In all of these words, the AI combination sounds different. Diamond, daily, pair. So we have a choice. I suspect that the organization prefers AIPAC to deflect attention away from the fact that it has little to do with A for America or Americans. So I prefer to call it AIPAC, because it is definitely I for Israel-centric, as we shall see. The AIPAC Policy Conference is the pro-Israel community's preeminent annual gathering. The event attracts more than 6,000 community and student activists from all 50 states, and more than half of the Senate, a third of the House of Representatives, and countless Israeli and American policymakers and thought leaders, and so on and so forth. But it's a one-way street. Take a look at some of the issues on the agenda. You won't find much that has to do with America or Americans. Example: Israel didn't like the Goldstone report on its savage attack on Gaza in December 2008 and January 2009, so AIPAC pushed the United States Senate to vote to rescind United Nations support for the report and take no further action against Israel under its recommendations. The resolution, which passed by unanimous consent on April 14th and was sponsored by Senators Kirsten Gillibrand and Jim Risch, comes after Justice Richard Goldstone retracted the central claims of his controversial report that falsely accused Israel of targeting civilians during its caste-led military campaign. For the record, Goldstone, who was a Zionist, was put under enormous pressure by Israel to make his retractions. But the Pandora's box of Israeli atrocities had already been opened.
4 people died here, all women, shot. Having bulldozed the place, the Israelis destroyed the village water tower. The only houses left standing were those the occupying troops had camped in, or positioned snipers in. In the house they'd occupied, Israeli soldiers left some writing on the wall. "Gaza, here we are," one read. "You can run, but you can't hide. Make war, not peace. Arabs need to die. If you can take it, there's worse to come." Zaytun, a few miles north, also flattened by Israeli bulldozers. But in this house, they'd herded 100 members of the Samuni clan. And then they shelled it, killing 49 of them. The mass funeral wake is in its final day.
In September 2009, Judge Goldstone had this to say.
The mission concluded that actions amounting to war crimes, and possibly in some respects crimes against humanity, were committed by the Israel Defense Force.
But in his recent retraction, Goldstone now characterizes the killing of 29 members of the Samuni family as an accident.
She's saying if it was an accident, why they could enter our home with 18 members in it and kill my husband, murder him in front of all of these kids.
So why are these two trying to cover up Israel's appalling human rights record? And what's the going rate for that service rendered by this pair of Roman Catholic senators, one Democrat and one Republican? 30 pieces of silver for their campaign coffers? Or a bit more to take care of inflation? Or what about swimming pools for their back gardens? I wonder if they've seen what the IDF did with their battle tanks in some poor Palestinian's back garden, or rather the agricultural fields that their very livelihoods depend upon. Someone will flag this video as inappropriate if I show the bodies of some of the over 300 children killed, or some of the over 1,600 injured in that walled and fenced-in prison, but I can show you pictures of those responsible for their deaths and horrific injuries. There are many other Israel-centric issues on its 2011 agenda, but this attempt at covering up the Goldstone report says it all as to what AIPAC is really all about, trying to protect apartheid Israel from its ever-growing number of critics. It is unconscionable, and every decent American should rise up and shout, "Enough is enough." In this graphic, the orange represents the population of the United States, approximately 310 million citizens, while the P represents the membership of AIPAC, a mere 100,000 people, a pressure group whose clearly stated aims and ambitions put the interests of Israel above and beyond any other consideration. Which means that AIPAC is, to all intents and purposes, the voice of America, And only when the voices of the majority of United States citizens are heard will this gross imbalance be redressed. This organization is doing something about it, aptly named Move Over AIPAC. Look them up on the internet and give them all the support you can. Others to look for are Stop AIPAC and Students Against AIPAC. How much longer can America afford to be squeezed for money, armaments, and the lives of its children in conflicts that have little strategic benefit for Americans, but which are turning more and more of the world against them? Take America back before it's too late.
For a long, long time, the state of Judea behaved in ways which annoyed the Romans but didn't do them any harm. At the point at which they were becoming a nuisance, the Romans turned against them, destroyed their temple, wiped them out, and told them, an empire has bigger concerns than you. This is what Israel faces in the next 25 years. The risk that the American empire will say, wait a minute, you don't matter to us so much. Either because we need oil more than we need you, or because oil is no longer important. Doesn't matter, both has the same effect. You are more trouble than you are worth, and the issue of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism is declining with the demographic move to the next generation. This is a catastrophe for Israel, because Israel has no other friends in the world.